Coming up today, President Park Geun-hye is in the Philippines for this year's APEC summit. She'll hold talks with her Canadian and Filipino counterparts on Wednesday. In an unprecedented step, the European Union agrees to provide aid and assistance to France following the Paris terror attacks. Plus, Russia says a bomb brought down the jet that crashed in Egypt over 2 weeks ago, killing all 224 on board. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Wednesday, November 18th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this morning, President Park Geun-hye, who is halfway through her three-nation tour, is currently in the Philippines to attend the APEC summit. Our Hwang Sang-hee, who is travelling with the President, files this report from Manila.
At this year's APEC summit, President Park and other Asia-Pacific leaders will work on building inclusive economies and sustainable and resilient communities. The two-day summit brings together 21 world leaders from countries including the United States, Japan, and China. The APEC nations account for nearly 60% of the global GDP and almost half of the world's trade volume. On the sidelines of the event, President Park will hold bilateral summits with her Canadian and Filipino counterparts on Wednesday. With Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the two will discuss a range of economic issues, including the Korea-Canada Free Trade Agreement, as well as cooperation in climate change.
As the summit will be the first meeting between the two leaders, it will be an opportunity for them to get to know each other and intensify Korea and Canada's practical cooperation.
As for the summit with Filipino President Benigno Aquino, attention is on whether President Park will give a clear stance on the South China Sea dispute. Later in the day, President Park will meet with the APEC Business Advisory Council and hold an unofficial dialogue with the Pacific Alliance, a Latin American trade bloc composed of Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. The real game will be Thursday's summit, where President Park is expected to lay out specific policy directives for inclusive growth based on South Korea's development experience. These include more support for small and mid-sized firms, human resources development, and boosting rural communities. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News, Manila.
Now staying with the APEC summit, and there is a degree of tension in Manila, not just because of the heightened security level there in light of the Paris terror attacks, but because of the ongoing territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Our Shin Se-min reports.
Leaders from around the world are now in Manila ahead of the two-day East Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. And already on the sidelines, there's chatter, mainly over tensions between the U.S. and China and the issue of maritime security. U.S. President Barack Obama said that he would visit the Philippine Navy's flagship, the U.S.-made Gregorio del Pilar, and will also sit down with his counterpart, Benigno Aquino, to discuss a wide range of issues, including disputes in the South China Sea and economic cooperation. Leaders of the 12-nation Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement are also slated to meet for the first time since they struck a deal together. But such moves are irking China, which is involved in bitter territorial conflicts at sea with the Philippines and other neighboring Asian countries. Chinese President Xi Jinping, however, aims to boost global economic development and sideline talks, spelling out his regional policies on cooperation in the Asia-Pacific. His focus will be on the economy, the progress on the construction of the Silk Road economic belt, and the 21st century maritime Silk Road, laying out opportunities the Beijing-pitched initiatives will bring to countries in the region. Earlier, China made clear that it does not want the focus of the summit to be on the South China Sea, but rather trade talks. Attention will be focused on how the sideline action will influence relations among the APEC member nations when the summit gets underway. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, all EU member states have agreed to support France in its fight against terrorism. This comes after France has invoked an EU treaty collective defence article requesting military help from its EU partners in response to the terror attacks in Paris. It marks the first time the article has been used in the history of the EU. EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini said France will be in contact bilaterally in the coming days to express the support it requires. She added that the EU will ensure the greatest effectiveness in its common response. Now, France's defence minister said the EU's support was a political act of great significance. The aid could be in support of France's airstrikes in Syria or in other areas France needs help. Russia has confirmed that a passenger jet that crashed over Egypt's Sinai Peninsula last month was brought down by a bomb. Russia's FSB security service reached its conclusion Tuesday that the crash was an act of terrorism, saying a homemade bomb containing around 1 kilogram of TNT went off on board, causing the plane to break up in mid-air. The Islamic State militant group had already claimed responsibility for the attack. Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed to punish those who carried out the attack and ordered an increase in airstrikes on ISIS-held territory in Syria. However, Egypt continues to maintain terrorism is yet to be proven. It has also denied reports that 2 employees at Sharm el-Sheikh airport have been detained on suspicions of involvement in the plane crash. The Russian Metrojet aircraft crashed 23 minutes after takeoff from Sharm el-Sheikh, killing all 224 people on board. The hacking group Anonymous claims to have taken down 5,500 Twitter accounts linked to the militant group that calls itself Islamic State. The collective recently declared cyber war on the terror organisation in the wake of last weekend's terror attacks on Paris. Anonymous also published the web addresses of alleged ISIS-affiliated websites, dark web pages, Twitter accounts, Tumblr accounts, Facebook pages and web servers. Now, some of the information even includes the physical addresses of a person who claims is an ISIS recruiter in Europe. None of the details that have been shared have been independently confirmed yet. Back here in Korea, and the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs Committee held a hearing on Tuesday on last weekend's terror attacks in Paris for more on Korea's domestic but also global anti-terrorism efforts. Our Park Geun-hye reports.
Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Im Seong-nam briefed lawmakers on Tuesday on the government's efforts to prevent terrorist attacks in coordination with other countries. The Foreign Ministry has designated roughly 20 Korean embassies as central to the government's anti-terrorism efforts, but for security purposes, he did not reveal the names of the countries where the embassies are stationed.
The Foreign Ministry is attempting to put forth its best efforts to form a global network centered around roughly 20 designated embassies. These are embassies that are either facing a high threat level or that are stationed in countries that are proactively taking part in the fight against terrorism.
Asked by a lawmaker whether Korea will contribute ground forces to the fight against ISIS, Im said Korea will go along with U.S. President Obama's declaration that the U.S. will not put boots on the ground in Syria. The first vice minister added the Korean government is instead continuing to provide humanitarian aid as well as contributions to a UN initiative to counter violent extremism.
The government is continuing its contributions of humanitarian, social and economic aid to countries who have suffered damage and pain at the hands of ISIS.
Im also said a Korean teenager who joined ISIS earlier this year is presumed to be dead, according to information gathered by the ministry and the Turkish embassy, although he said that hasn't been confirmed. The Foreign Affairs Committee plans to adopt its own resolution condemning the terror attacks and vying to support the fight against terrorism. Meanwhile, Tuesday's cabinet meeting also centered on the topic of the recent Paris terror attack. Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn, who presided over the meeting, stressed the need to overhaul laws and regulations related to the prevention of and response to any potential threats to the nation. Park Geun-hye, Arirang News.
Now, despite fears of a global sell-off after the Paris terror attacks. Markets have taken it relatively calmly, but concerns linger over the incident's possible impact on Europe's consumption, the global economy, and also Korea. Hwang Jie reports.
There were no major market jolts on the first trading day after Friday's terror attacks in Paris. Shares in the U.S. actually had their strongest session in 3 weeks on Monday. Stock markets in London and Frankfurt also closed up, with only Paris edging down a mere 0.08%. Analysts say the impacts of such surprises often fade within a short period of time.
When the terrorists strike, that's usually it for a while. We're on guard, we're looking harder, and I don't want to say it too lightly because this is a very serious thing, but ultimately, does it affect the economy or doesn't affect the economy is what matters to the market, and I don't think it will.
Reflecting the muted reaction from global markets, Korea's benchmark Kospi also ended up around 1%, closing at 1,963.58. Although financial markets remained resilient, there are fears that Friday's attacks will hurt one of France's key industries and cause a further slowdown of the already weak economy. In Korea, the concern is that it could result in a drop in exports to France.
Around 7.5% of France's economy relates directly to tourism revenue, and therefore this is absolutely the last thing that the French economy needs. It will certainly encourage the European Central Bank to be more stimulative than otherwise might have been the case.
But Kim Wi-dae at the Korea Center for International Finance says any impact will be limited.
Korea's export exposure to France is very small. It's just 0.5% of our total export.
France stood as Korea's 30th largest export market last year, with total volume at around $2.5 billion. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, if you are a regular drinker of coffee, we have some welcome news for you. A new study has found that people that drink a moderate amount of coffee every day may live longer. According to researchers at Harvard University, drinkers of both caffeinated and decaf coffee were at lower risk of death from heart disease, diabetes, neurological diseases, and even suicide. The researchers analysed health data from more than 208,000 people over 3 decades. However, experts have noted that this was an observational study based on self-reported data and does not show a cause and effect relationship. The study was published in the latest edition of the journal Circulation. Now, an international forum on food production and processing took place right here in Seoul on Tuesday. It's all part of Korea's efforts to lead the way in the food industry in East Asia. Our Kwon Jung-oh takes us there.
The 5th International Food Cluster Forum opened in Seoul on Tuesday, bringing together food industry representatives from Korea and abroad. They are discussing new technologies and innovation that will help advance the growing global food market. The forum is also part of a larger venture by the Korean government to try and establish itself as the center of food and agricultural business in Asia.
Through this food cluster, our agricultural group food industry can take a leap forward. To give that momentum, the ministry will do everything it can to encourage and help in this endeavor.
The food cluster, known as Food Polis, is an industrial site that aims to become the Silicon Valley of the food industry. Located in the central Korean city of Iksan in North Jeollado province, the cluster will take up an area of over 2.3 million square meters and will be home to food research centers, processing and production plants. When construction is completed in 2016, various Korean companies are expected to move in, along with Western firms attracted by the special tax and employment incentives, as well as the opportunity to build a base in Asia. It's also hoped that working closely with international partners will help boost Korean food production and processing to global standards.
Many people in Europe like Asian food. It has to be packaged in the right way. It has to meet the European requirements of food safety. The easiest starting point for us is helping Korean companies to get better chances for exporting their food into Europe, for instance, or other parts of the world.
In the whole ICT field, Korea has developed into one of the leading countries in the world, both in production and in research. It is time to broaden that scope, and I believe that food industry can be one of them.
Events such as this forum is looking to help Korea forge relationships with its international partners as it looks to establish itself as the hub of food production and processing in Northeast Asia. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now. Do have a wonderful day, and thank you as always for tuning in to our newscasts. Until next time, goodbye.